All right, folks, welcome to another episode of the Made for Agriculture podcast. My name's Adam Jones.
And I'm Cameron Horine.
All right, and this morning we're back doing our in-season insights with our agronomists from across the state. So we've tried to record one of these episodes every couple weeks, just let these guys give you an update on what's going on in the countryside. I think that's some pretty valuable information. So just in case, not sure when everybody's going to get a chance to listen to this, but we were recording this on Friday at 6:30 in the morning on July 14th. So we are Friday, July 14th, just in case you're listening to this from 2 months from now and what these guys are saying doesn't make any sense. But we'll try to get these episodes dropped pretty quickly. That way they go out fast and everybody can kind of get some really nice, timely information. So I think the way we're going to do it this time is we're going to go through every one of them, let them all give a quick little update about what's going on in their area. And then if Cameron and I have any questions along the way or at the end, we'll kind of kick those in there as well. So we're going to start off this week with Retail North and Kevin Moore. So Kevin, what have you been seeing out there?
Good morning. Well, I'm going to start with corn. A couple of weeks ago we did talk about tar spot, and we are finding more and more of it. It is not, fortunately, it's when I say we're finding more and more of it, it seems to just kind of be in the areas that we already knew about that had been reported. We did start finding some in Schuyler County, and then more in Holt County, and I think more has been found in Marion County. But at least in the crop track program, we haven't found much outside of those areas. But we continue to watch that every week and make recommendations accordingly. But we're still, our recommendation is to put that fungicide on between VT and R2 for best results for prevention of that disease. Also in corn, we've been getting a lot of reports of Japanese beetles clipping silks, and a lot of those cases, the corn is already pollinated when we see that when we see those silks clipped off. So generally, while corn is trying to pollinate, the silks will keep growing until they get pollen. So after it's pollinated, they'll stop growing, and that's kind of where we'll see ears without silks. So the best way to check is to carefully peel the husks back and kind of shake it a little bit. And if the silks fall off, that means that every potential kernel where the silk fell off has pollen. So if there's still silks attached, those have not received pollen. So if we have a lot of silks attached and then we have Japanese beetles clipping them off faster than they can grow, then that could be a situation that would warrant putting an insecticide on. But it's very important in corn to kind of check and see where pollination is before we make any decisions on an insecticide. Would hate to see an application made after the corn's already pollinated, and it's not going to do us any good. But it's one thing I wanted to mention as well in corn. In soybeans, we are starting to see a lot more diseases show up. Now that we've had some rains in some areas, and a lot of times heavy rains, where we've had some water sitting, we have seen some later season Phytophthora kill off some beans. Also seeing some more common diseases such as septoria and downy mildew, which those are diseases we typically see every year, but as it's been dry, we hadn't really seen those until it started getting some rains. So anyways, some of those types of things are showing up, and which as far as septoria and downy mildew goes, those diseases in themselves don't really cause a whole lot of yield loss. But when we have a bunch of those diseases together, those are one of the reasons that we'll spray that fungicide at R3. That those are kind of the highlights for the week, anyways.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Kevin. So I do have one question after yours, just because you talked a little bit about fungicide timing in corn. One question I heard or saw asked this week was on those cornfields that are somewhat uneven this year as far as getting to VT, just because of the dry weather and whatnot. From a fungicide standpoint, there, what's your recommendation? Would you wait until the entire field is at VT, whereas the first part of that field, maybe pushing that R1, R2 stage, or would you spray it the first time you see tassels? Kind of what's your thought there?
Well, that's probably going to depend on each situation, but if you have an uneven field and we do have some corn in there getting towards the end of that R2 stage, uh, and, and we have some corn that's not tasseled yet, I'd kind of want to see those, percentages and all that. Try to hit a happy medium. Ideally, we'd want all of the tassels out, and that might not always be the case. If we have a field that's extremely uneven, when we have where we have some corn that's at the end of that R2 stage, when we're starting to enter that milk stage, and still a lot of corn that does not have tassels, we may want to hit the middle when the majority of the field has tassels, but we do need to keep in mind that if we have a field that's not fully tasseled, that we feel like still needs a fungicide on it, we do need to leave those surfactants out.
Gotcha.
We in the past we have seen some issues related to adding surfactants to corn that is not tasseled. So that's something to keep in mind. But it would probably be on a case by case basis, depending on how uneven that field is, and we try to hit. We want to make sure the majority of each field is in an uh, optimum application window.
Gotcha. Thanks for that, Kevin. Appreciate it. So next up, we got Scott Wilburn. Scott Wilburn covers Retail Central for MFA, so that'd be kind of the I-70 corridor. So Scott, what have you been seeing this week?
A little bit of everything. The one consistent thing this year has been when we get a rain, boy, it's just very local. Nothing has been anywhere widespread. We got about 1.3 inches yesterday, first rain we've seen around home for probably a month or so. Neighbor to the north of us, we're right at the edge of town, but about 5 minutes away of a drive, they've 4/10 less. As I talked around to people in the area yesterday morning, excuse me, same situation. I mean, 1.6 inches at this place, 4/10 at this place, just, half a mile down the road, just crazy. So because of that, I mean, we've just got all conditions. Starting on the positive, and I'm not going to call any of them out, but we've got a couple. I won't even call them areas. I just almost call them neighborhoods where they've caught every rain that's come through. And I talked to one MFA manager yesterday. He's lining up fungicide, saying that they're looking at one of their best crops ever. But it's in a pocket that's just kind of caught it from every which direction, and just been very, very fortunate. We obviously have a lot of the other end of the spectrum where they haven't caught anything. Places that I mean, I've wrote about it in my articles, already 3 weeks ago, that were just looking very, very dire. So we're still managing corn in a lot of cases. We've got some crop that looks pretty good. A lot of it that looks a lot better than we would expect. But we're just really managing them on a field-to-field basis. There's still some fungicide going on in places, and managing insects as well. But then we're also getting some questions about nitrate levels and safe way to chop corn and feed it. Obviously the hay situations exacerbating some of that, and driving some of those questions. So a little bit of everything on the corn side. Give a quick disease update, kind of like Kevin said. Tar spots being discovered in a few places. One of our cams out in the Ellsbury area found some here about a week ago that was confirmed. We had a Todd Myers out there had a alert come out. I don't know that we had anything to do with this one, but one popped up in Lafayette County here just a few days ago. I know of one being looked at right now in my county of Aldrain, my home county, I should say. So they're starting to kind of pop up throughout the region. Like Kevin said, I don't know that we're finding a huge amount of it in our crop track program. We've had there have been several tests that have went in that have ended up being negative that folks have had. But people are looking for it at least, and I think that's a good thing. We're still trying to gauge what the heck this disease is going to do to us in this area. So we're watching that. Um, Moving on to soybeans. Um, Similar situation. We've got some stuff that looks really great and some stuff that looks pretty tough. To the extreme tough end. I was down south a couple of days ago looking at beans that were, they were decent sized beans, 12, 15 inches tall, and you could still see fertilizer on the ground from where they spread fertilizer right before planting. Pretty extreme. Um, but we've discussed this a little bit for the last couple of weeks with the early planting and probably the stress. Also, we had a lot of beans enter reproductive stages a little earlier than what we're used to. I think it's something that's going to become very common for us as we move more and more into early planted beans if future seasons allow. But we've got a lot of beans that have technically R3 for. We generally pull the trigger on fungicide at the front end of that, but usually that's at the tail end of July. So we've kept our powder dry for the last couple of weeks, but we're starting to turn loose fields for fungicide and insecticide. As we do that, we're having to make some calls also because of spider mites that are in pockets in a lot of areas. We don't want to use just a traditional pyrethroid. We're either need to use something like bifenthrin or in some cases starting to get a little bit of interest in Agromec. It's a Syngenta product. It's more of a miticide and maybe mixing it with one of our pyrethroids, but dimethoate's another, back in the day it was Saigon. It's an option also. I don't know that it's really being utilized much. But it does need to be on people's radar. We don't want to go in trying to encourage plant health with fungicide and insecticide and end up blowing up spider mites in the process and causing an issue. So doing that. I'd say the last comment that I had to make, well, I looked at some beans yesterday that are strong R4, probably close to R5, and they're still wanting to make a pass of Liberty and Enlist. And we're going to deal with that. I think also as we move into if we do start planting our beans early, but it's creating some real issues. In a year where these beans would have jumped up and really got to growing, canopied quicker, also having better conditions for weed control, because a lot of these are weeds that did not die with the first pass. Maybe it would be less of an issue, but in the case of this situation, I don't feel great about going out and spraying Enlist on those beans, but I feel horrible about going out and spraying Liberty on them. But those are some of the decisions I think that are going to be made as we have weed issues in beans that are a lot farther advanced into reproductive stages. So I think that's all I had.
Yeah, Scott, you brought up a good point that I was hoping somebody was going to touch on is you drive down the road this year, you see a lot of beans that haven't canopied, and so there's going to be escape weeds, and having those tough conversations about what kind of yield drag are you going to cause in a tough year already if we spray either Enlist or especially Liberty on those late beans. So yeah.
Yep, that was on my radar too. That was already one of the questions I'd written down for the end. So I appreciate you covering it now, Scott. That's something nobody wants to admit to having to do, leaving weeds out there, but it's also gets more dangerous. So I'm with you in your fear of some of those passes. Shannon, I think you're up next. So Shannon covers retail south for us. So that's southwest Missouri, southeast Kansas. So Shannon, what's going on down there?
Yeah, so very similar to what Scott was saying about the sporadic rains. That's been true for my area as well. Was that night before last? We caught a pretty good sized rain for most of the region, but again, it was some areas got 2 or 3 tenths, some areas got 4 inches. It just depended on what clouds you were under. Corn, for the most part, has held its own even through these drought conditions. We had good pollination, which is something we didn't have last year. So this time last year, when we were looking at drought stress corn, we were looking at a plant that didn't have any kernels on the ear at all, and we were trying to make a decision on silage, and we were worried about nitrates. This year, we've at least got a good solid ear, but we're again having to make those decisions on if we're going to have to chop for silage or take it to grain. This is our second year of the drought, and forage production was dinged last year, and it's dinged again this year. So there's going to be even more of a demand than what we saw previously. But there's areas that really look good, that not going to be any issue, and then there's I would say the majority of it is we're going to have to make those tough decisions on what we're going to do with the crop. Corn for us is milk stage, so we're a little bit farther ahead than the guys at the north. Disease pressure really has kind of slowed down, mainly because of the dry conditions. But we're starting to see, corn's firing up above the ear leaf, almost up some places up in the upper canopy. So that's the majority of what's causing some issues in our corn. Soybeans, we're in that unique area where we've got beans that are emerging to beans that are R3 with all the double crop that we have. Our first crop beans, even the ones that were planted, first week of June there, most of them are all in the reproductive stages now. Beans range from R1 to R4. Some places have been getting, fungicide and insecticide applications. One thing that I've been taking note is we've been seeing a lot of corn earworm show up in cornfields, and it's just a matter of time before they move on. As the corn matures, they'll move on to the beans, and I'm expecting in 2 to 3 weeks we'll start seeing podworm outbreak in the soybeans. Double crop beans, the big thing we've been focused on this week has been stand assessments. There's been a few things that have led to less than desirable stands, lack of moisture being one of them. And then seed placement and the method of planting has also led to some issues. A lot of guys, I'm in favor too. I'm not trying to knock anything, but drilled beans this year just haven't had the stands that we'd like to see. Generally we want to be able to drill those beans to be able to close that canopy faster, since we're planting a little later in the season. But with the lack of moisture, just have not been getting that seed placement that we needed, that depth that we need to get to moisture. And it's led to quite a few replant decisions. With the rain we got this week, I'm not seeing any issues going forward on getting a solid stand. It's just something we've been seeing this week.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for that, Shannon. It's a good update. And last but not least, we will head down to Retail Southeast, which is the boot heel, or south of St. Louis for us. So, Jesse, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, no, we've been blessed with some rain. I don't know if we're getting more than anybody else, but I'd say the past 2 weeks across the board, everybody's got at least an inch. But we got extremes of down in northeast Arkansas, 6.5 inches just in the past week, which luckily we were so dry that 6.5 inches really didn't affect much. Just give us a break from watering, which a lot of people were happy with. And in general, these rains have put everybody in a better mood, which has been nice on the retail end. Not so much stress. Everybody's decided this later corn they're going to go ahead and fungicide their beans, and looking like if it'll keep raining, all these later beans will get fungicided. So that's good. And we've had a lot of dewy mornings, so I expect some diseases to start showing up. I don't know how bad they're going to be when they show up, which is something we're going to keep an eye on. As a whole, southern rust is still basically nowhere to be found in northeast Arkansas. So I think we're going to be all right there also. Double crop beans, with the rains we've got this week, I think, as far as I know, everybody's getting them planted and getting a stand. So that's been a blessing for them guys, because a lot of them waited 2.5, 3 weeks to plant to try to get a rain so they know they get a stand. To jump over to my other crops that nobody else has, rice has come along nicely. These rains have really helped guys with keeping a flood of their row rice, keeping it watered, keeping it up. There's a lot of fields on the top end where we couldn't get water across the middles. It wouldn't soak up just because we were so hot and dry. And in them cases, you get irrigation where the irrigation water is. We're taking up nitrogen and nutrients, and where the middles were not. So just the crop kind of looked ugly, and these rains kind of got it looking better, which is a blessing. I'd say in the next week or so, we'll start seeing rice head. So the big watch out there will be stink bugs. And then speaking of bugs, we ain't had no major bugs in corner beans, but in the beans we have had just enough, a little bit of everything to make you mad. So we're making sure we're using good insecticides with our fungicide passes to clean up whatever's out there so we don't have problems later. Cotton, right before we started getting all these rains, all these scouts started turning loose on cotton irrigation, and everybody was running around like chickens with their heads cut off. And now that it started raining, a lot of this cotton is looking a whole lot better and turning the corner. And as a whole, I think everybody's happier with this rain. Not to just keep talking about rain, but after 6 weeks of nothing, it makes everybody a lot happier.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jesse. That turnaround in at least hitting in goal, for some of this crop is definitely something positive. So yeah, rain can fix a lot of problems that you can run around and make yourself go crazy over for sure. So yeah. Appreciate that. Guys, what'd we miss? Every question I kind of had written down ahead of time, at least one of you guys kind of covered in your weekly update. So anything else we need to cover before we cut it off here?
I was curious from Kevin. You've had a couple weeks to assess after the big windstorm up north. What was kind of the percentage of green snap? What came back? How things look up there?
Yeah, that is something we talked about a couple weeks ago, and about everything, it was kind of as we expected, kind of goosenecked back up, at least to the point where the ears and the tassels are upright and that corn's getting pollen. There's going to be a lot of it's going to be a pain to combine for sure, but fortunately, most of the corn that went down was, before the tassels were all the way out, and we did have a little stem growth to happen yet at that time. So, as that stem finished elongating, it was able to kind of stand back up enough to where at least with the majority of it, we could have successful pollination. As far as the green snap went, there was some isolated cases here and there, but I have not received very many reports at all on green snap out of that deal. So I think it turned out about what I expected. Not a perfect situation, especially with a lot of corn kind of tangled up and goosenecked, and come harvest time there'll be some headaches, I'm sure, but on the bright side, I think there'll be grain to get. It's just a matter of getting it.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Kevin. On top of that, what else you guys got? Anything for the week? All right. Not seeing anything. I appreciate you guys jumping on here first thing in the morning again and giving everybody a little update. We will meet back up in 2 weeks and go through everything again. I'm sure everything will have changed between now and then. It typically does. So thanks, Kevin, Scott, Shannon, Jesse, Cameron. Thanks to all you guys for your time, and thanks to everybody for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.